In 2021, shortly following the release of Operation Crimson Heist, Rainbow Six Siege hit an all-time high concurrent player count on PC, 6 years after its initial release. The player base is objectively healthy, and many agree the competitive meta of the game is very nearly as good as it has ever been. However, the growing sentiment is that the game is in a weird and maybe even precarious place. Between growing numbers of cheaters, an incredibly and increasingly steep learning curve, a toxic community, a slowing drip of new content, and veteran pros retiring and big content creators leaving the scene entirely, one has to wonder how long Siege can hold on to its position. Even in my own personal experience, many of my friends have moved on or burned out from the game, and this is not a unique situation, it seems. Despite everything, Rainbow Six Siege is still a unique and beautifully complex game that's niche has yet to be rivaled or challenged by really any other game on the market. It's a small miracle that it even made it out of its rough early years, and it continues to push boundaries and improve itself even 6 years into its life cycle. But is Ubisoft doing enough to keep the players they have, bring back the ones they've lost, and bring in new players to this world? This is one filthy casual's perspective on the state of Siege. I want to talk about a little bit of my thoughts on the state of Siege at the moment. So as far as the new season goes, I have to say Flores is super fun and he feels impactful. Even just in like the couple hours that I played, I thought I got some cool like clips with him. You know, I wasn't like fragging out. I mean, he's definitely like a support character, but if you use all 4 of those drones well, I mean, there were times when I used all 4 of them and I was destroying utility. Actually, here, I can probably pull up a clip. So I think we get in here and there's a guy like on this new bridge over here and Max gets the kill. And then I start sending my drones in. So I send one into here, and I push that guy out of there. And then I start holding this angle because I wasn't sure. I don't know if that was the same guy, but I had a little bit of intel on the site, and I had pushed one of the guys out of the small office. So I send the. So this is funny. I don't know what this shield here was for. I thought maybe they were playing like an extension here, but it doesn't look like anyone was playing it. So I just was able to destroy it. But yeah, I basically just like kept sending those drones in, and I felt like every drone was having kind of like a pretty decent impact. Like it's good value for like what you're putting in, which is essentially just one of his 4 drones. I think I ended up using 3 here. I just kept peeking this guy and eventually got the kill. And then I drone out the last guy. Oh, there's 2 left. Well, Max gets this guy. So I push that guy out of there, and then someone calls this last guy in here, and I go and get him. But this was the round. I played that, and I said immediately to my friends, I was like, Flores is sick. Like, this is super fun. Like, that's the value that I see people getting out of Flores, is stuff like that, you know, just like clearing positions and clearing utility, which I believe is what he was meant for. I think it's easy to look at him, though, at first and be like, oh, he's got a C4 drone. But I don't think you're like killing people necessarily with it like you are with the C4. So that's what I think about Flores. The Gone 6 I used a little bit. It feels like, I don't know, like low impact is the word that comes to mind. I don't feel like I'm making a huge difference with the Gone. I mean, I think you can, because I remember on that same Villa game I was playing Maestro, and every time there was an Amaru that was getting in, and I had a cam on 90, and the Amaru would come in, and she would shoot it every time with the gun. And I was like, oh, well, sure, she can do that now. But I haven't found myself in too many situations where I thought it was making a big difference yet, but I've only played a little bit of the new season. So I think the big thing, though, is that it's a good balancing tool, because you don't have, if you want someone to be able to deal with that, like bulletproof stuff and deny utility, you don't need to give them frags anymore. So I like that, and I like that they've experimented with making a weapon, essentially like a secondary weapon that is like a utility denial type thing, because they can experiment in the future with adding a bunch of different things. I mean, arguably already you give people secondary shotguns not for killing potential, but because they can make rotate holes and open hatches and stuff like that. So I think of the Gone sort of in that same category. But I guess time will tell how like the meta develops with it. Right now it's like, it feels like it's got a pretty low ceiling. but I think that's how they want it. It's good. It's good that it exists. That's what I'll say. And that was kind of my assessment with it when I read the patch notes to begin with. Border rework is cool. I played probably 5 games on it. I think the map is mostly changed for the better. It's still, I think the best thing about the old border was that it was like simple, straightforward. It's like one of the first maps you can really learn like how to attack and defend. And I think that's still true. So I like that about it, that it didn't become like this complex maze like some of the reworks have had the tendency to in the past. But I think that's like one of those maps that's like good for learning the game, because it's kind of got everything, like vertical play and, you know, opening up like a key wall on a few different sites. I think the big thing though is like it's a good rework, and it kept like the bones of the map there. But it's just not exciting, you know, like it's still border. And I think that's kind of true about a lot of the things in this season, is like, it's just not a lot. Like Flores is cool. The Gone is cool, but like, you know, you pop like a Malusi Banshee or a Maestro Cam like once, and then you're kind of like, okay, this just is what it is. Border is like, if you've played the game before, you already know border. I mean, like nothing about it is really all that different. And that's really it. Like even on the test server, I mean, they had those like Nook changes and stuff, but and Get Flanked actually made a video today talking about this, and I thought he made a good point. It was like the test server was like the better version of this season, with like pre-nerf Flores before they nerfed his radius, Nook with like her gadget bypassing ability, and then what launched is like, it's not a lot, which is fine, because I think the game like content and like meta wise is in like a good place. But I think they had this like big hype year reveal, and they revealed all this cool stuff like the attacker repick and the drone after death and all that stuff that people were like excited to try out. And they didn't say, you know, this is coming season 1. They just revealed it. It was clear that it was a year reveal at least, but I think that was lost on some people. So I think people were expecting to boot up Crimson Heist and have, you know, these big game-changing things in there, and they just weren't. It was kind of just a normal season, even arguably a smaller season, considering that there wasn't like a big operator rework really, and border is like more or less the same with just little tweaks. The thing that I don't want to ignore too is that at this point COVID could be having a significant impact on like the workflow of how they're getting these seasons out, because the year 5 reveal, they had a lot of stuff that they were like, that was like pretty much ready. Like the Tachanka rework, which didn't even come until like pretty recently in the grand scheme of things. They showed like a full functioning video of that rework. So my impression is, and this is all like guessing and speculation, but my impression is that they get that stuff ready early, and then they just focus on polishing and delivering it throughout the year. So I think now that we're a whole year into Ubisoft like working from home, I think that if there's any disruption to their workflow, it's like now is when we're really going to see it. And some things were delayed, like the replay system and whatnot. And even that Tachanka rework could have been delayed too. I think I expected that to come out sooner than it actually did. But who knows? Who knows what the story with that was? But I would expect that if we're gonna see any impact on like the amount of content and the frequency that they can deliver content, it's from COVID. It's gonna be now that they've had kind of like a whole year of content in the pipeline kind of get pushed out. So that might be why we're seeing that this season. A big addition though is the replay mode, and that's super exciting, you know, that it's finally rolled out. You know, they said year 5 for that, and it didn't end up happening other than just like the one test server where it was in. But the fact that it's in the game now is awesome. It is quite buggy though. It's definitely rough. They call it a beta. It is a beta for sure. There's no two ways around it. I don't think I've replayed a game yet where the sound worked properly. So that's something to consider. Like, it's still in a rough state, but it exists, and that's awesome. And you can start seeing the potential of it right away. And hopefully it's going to be a big focus for them to get this replay mode into like a working and super, super smooth state, so that people can start using it and generating content off of it and learning from it and all that good stuff, all that stuff that they want people to be able to do with that. After this season launched, and you know, taking into account my experience in Neon Dawn, and I played a lot during Neon Dawn. Neon Dawn might be the single season ever that I've played the most of this game. But I have to say that the like meta and like competitive health of the game might be the best that it's ever been right now. And I don't think that that's like too controversial of a statement. I think a lot of people would agree with that. The game feels balanced and fun. I'm tentatively excited for the upcoming changes of this year, like the attacker repick and the ability to drone or use cameras after death. I think droning after death sounds all right. Like I'm down to try that out, because you still, as an attacker, you still have to preserve those drones. So there's kind of a trade-off there, and especially if they introduce the attacker repick at the same time, if you want to know like what lineup people are bringing, you might have to sacrifice a drone, like to go in sight and get those scans off to see what they're bringing. But with the defenders being able to use like Echo and Maestro being able to use like pretty disruptive, we'll say, gadgets after death, I'm not so sure I like that. But we'll see. I think introducing those to the game ultimately though will be good for what, or I should say what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to reduce the amount of downtime that the game has. And I think they're going about it in an interesting way. So I'll be curious to see how it plays out. I think people are resistant to change in this game to a fault. And I think actually something shaking up the game significantly like that would be good. I just don't want them to go too far. I think the biggest issue is that if they go too far, the game kind of becomes something else. So all of that is good, and I'm excited about that. I think right now most people aren't saying that the game meta-wise or competitively is in a bad place. That we've gone through periods of that. You know, there was Lion, even Malusi kind of created this meta where it felt like you couldn't get into the building as an attacker. But right now I think we're in a good spot, and I'm happy with what they're kind of teasing for the future. There's actually a good video by Reaper, one of the best Siege content creators out there, and he made a video called like, is Ubisoft going too far, where he talks about like the sort of the nerfs that they've made to defenders and how they're sort of kind of flipping the table to make attackers a little bit more, we'll say, palatable, to make attacking a little bit more user friendly, to eliminate power positions. That was one thing, you know. Anyways, he has a great video on that, where the title of the video is a bit misleading because it says, is Ubisoft going too far? And his answer is ultimately no. But he does have an interesting discussion about kind of like the competitive health of the game and what is important for the game to be competitively healthy. So I recommend watching that. I think it's safe to say that the game is in a good state, competitively and meta-wise though. The problems with the game right now, and a lot of people will agree with this, come from things like cheating, stream sniping, bugs and glitches, glitch abuse. I mean, even this season launched with this bug where your drone on border can get stuck in a vent if you spawn on Valley, or issues like the community. The community of this game is notoriously toxic. They've been teasing this reputation system. You know, they say it's kind of in the background watching you and collecting data from you and figuring out what kind of player you are, and eventually it's going to hit and just say like, you know, you get all these sanctions, you know, you're a toxic player, or you're a good player, you're a nice player, and you get rewards. But when it rolls out, will it have any effect? I mean, who's to say? Like, you don't want to just outright ban people from the game because they pay for it. So I don't think what Ubi wants is to cull their player base, but they want everyone to have a good experience. To be honest, the best experience in this game, in my mind, is to play with a 3-stack or more, you know, to essentially have you and people you know occupy more than half of the team. Because that, in my experience, as someone who usually plays like that, eliminates a lot of the toxicity. At least that can come from teammates. Because at least like if someone is like spouting off, you have someone to back you up. And you can just mute all chat. I've gone through phases with that. But again, not everyone is going to do that. Like when you buy the game, you don't immediately have friends who play the game or whatever. You don't know people who play the game. You might just hop into a game, solo queue, and just get berated by someone who thinks they're hot shit just because you're a new player. It shouldn't be like that. And I don't even solo queue personally anymore for this exact reason. I just find it not fun, stressful, and like even when I'm not running into toxic people, I'm running into people who don't have mics or whatever. So I just don't solo queue at all, which is a problem. I mean, that should be an option for people who want to do it. Another thing is the game is just sweaty as all hell. Even like casual quick match it's kind of a toss up of if you're gonna get people who like don't care at all, are like recruit rushing or playing, you know, shotguns or whatever, versus like some plat who's like just gonna fly out every window and like try to get clips. Like for a new player or an inexperienced player or like a very casual player, like that's not the experience they want out of the game. Some people don't have a ton of time to dedicate to the game, and it's got a massive learning curve. It's got effectively an infinite learning curve. Like there's always more you can learn about the game. But when the average like skill of the people you're going up against is like equivalent to like 300 plus hours in the game, and you're someone who just started up the game for the first time, are you going to have 300 hours of bad experiences until you can finally say, okay, I know how to play this game now? Now, this is something that during the year reveal, Ubisoft clarified that they were working on. They had a whole cell of people dedicated to working on this. But is it possible that it could be too little too late? I mean, speaking from personal experience, I have friends who have essentially quit the game, not because they don't like the core mechanics and ideas of it, but because they don't want to have to try their asses off when the only time they engage with the game is after work on a Friday, and they're coming up against like plats and diamonds and casual that just want to farm clips off of them or whatever. So could it be too little too late? Will too many people leave before something is done? Given that we just hit an all-time high watermark for viewership in this game, probably not. But I'd really like to know what they're doing to address this before it gets out of hand. I mean, it affects my experience too. I mean, another thing is just like the complaints that people have about ranked and just matchmaking in general. And this is another thing they brought up during the year reveal, was that they want to rework the ranking system, which is great, I think. But the problems that it has currently are numerous. The MMR lock is a big thing. I think it's like 700 MMR difference that you can play with someone, which when that came out, I didn't think it was a big deal. But I realized what happens is if you're like a diamond player who has a friend that's like a gold, you cannot play with them in ranked at least, unless you go on like a Smurf account, essentially. Say you have like your friend's gold 2 and you're diamond, you would have to effectively, you know, just theoretically we'll say, you go on an account that is plat 3 to play with your friend. So the matchmaking is based on you being a plat 3 and your friend being a gold 2. And they're going to form the game based on that. But you're not a plat 3, you're a diamond. So you're still a diamond playing against people who are way lower skilled than you. And Ubisoft released this document that explained how the matchmaking system works fairly recently. I recommend reading that because it's interesting. But essentially, as we kind of knew, ranked, casual, and unranked all kind of have slightly different systems, but they're all based on the same system. The same number, like they're calculating just an MMR number. But what I'm noticing, and something that's interesting, and you can see this in one of my videos, is that R6 tab has started showing your casual MMR. So it's like it'll show you that you're like a plat in casual or whatever. It's just I assume that it's just deriving the rank based on the MMR number that it's grabbing from Ubisoft directly. And I'm like, I don't play that much rank, so you can look back and see that I'm like silver in the last few seasons, having played like 10 games or whatever, like just enough to get ranked. And then like plat in casual, which is a big disparity. I mean, that's huge. You shouldn't see things like that. I think that if the game really had like a grasp on each player's individual skill, that you would kind of generally trend towards like the same rank. So then the problem becomes that like I somehow got this rank in casual, which is telling the game that I can be matched up with people who are like diamonds in casual. So it doesn't even make me want to play casual or unranked anymore, which are supposed to be the modes that I'm supposed to be having fun in. And I do still play them, but it is a significant problem that I've noticed even. So I think a full rework of that matchmaking system, of that MMR number that it derives, would be a good idea. And they need to incentivize playing on your main account. I own a second account that I have just about never played on. I almost always play on my main because I want to unlock skins and stuff on my main account. You know, it's a dumb reason, but it's good enough for me. But for some people, it's not good enough. They need to somehow incentivize all these people to play and get ranked on their main account. And I think like adding things like a streamer mode and other things that make it easier, like if you're like a high diamond, you're a streamer, you're like a really good player, to not be matched up against like stream snipers and hackers. I wanted to talk too, because I recently started playing Valorant, which I think is like, you can say is kind of like apples to oranges with Siege, but Valorant as like a newer game is doing a lot of things right that I think Siege is still lacking in or doing wrong. In my opinion, Valorant offers a better variety of ways to play the game quickly and casually. The thing with Siege is that when you get into a game, you're kind of committing to a long experience. Now, I mean, it's the same in like unrated or in competitive in Valorant. Like your games are like an hour long or like, you know, like 40 minutes long. But you can play Spike Rush, which is like, in my mind, it's like the equivalent of casual. But Spike Rush is like, you don't have to think about what guns you're picking. You don't have to think about like buying your abilities. Like you just have everything and you just play. So it cuts out like so much of the downtime that's in a typical game of Valorant. They've also got Team Deathmatch for warming up. Right now they have Escalation, which is like a gun game. It's like Team Deathmatch where your guns like cycle out as you get kills. So they offer kind of like a nice palette of different games that you can play. I mean, there are probably people who play that game just to play Spike Rush and Team Deathmatch, and they don't play competitive or unrated at all. Whereas in Siege, I mean, your options are like ranked, unranked, which is just ranked without the exchange of elo, so lower stakes ranked essentially. It's the equivalent of unrated essentially from Valorant. And then you have quick match, which is just unranked but shorter. Slightly different rules, sure, but it's generally the same experience. The only difference really is like that you don't pick your site, which I think is fine. I don't hate that about casual as someone who plays a decent bit of it. And the longer rounds, which I think is just weird. I think they should just make them all the same. Like the fact that the rounds are 3.5 minutes long instead of 3, I think is doing them no favors. I think they need to just shave it down universally to 3 minutes. At the very least, like, you know, new players will learn the pace of the game. They might struggle at first to attack and manage their time well, but they'll learn the pace of the game there, and then they can translate that to other areas of the game. But yeah, Spike Rush and Valorant is good for, you know, just trying out different stuff, learning the game, and just playing really quickly. Something else about Valorant is that the agent abilities are straightforward. Now, this is kind of a mixed point because I think there are downsides to this too, but you have straightforward abilities. The guns are universal. I mean, you have like your unique gun skin, but there's no like scopes or attachments to figure out. Like you don't have to decipher what the hell the extended barrel does because there's no such thing. It's just this gun and that gun. Which one do you like best? And everyone has all the same guns too. And all of this leads to a more generous learning curve than Siege has, which is kind of it's a matter of debate because I think you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But my friends and I picked it up almost immediately. We obviously have shooter experience, so it's like you kind of pick up the mechanics pretty quickly. But it's nice and simple. It's easy to engage with. I mean, my girlfriend is even interested in trying it, whereas Siege is pretty much a non-starter for her, so that should tell you something. The last thing I want to say is I'm not sure if the matchmaking is better or if my sample size is just small, but it does feel like the game is better at matching you with people of a similar skill. Case in point, we kind of started off like playing against people who beat the crap out of us, and we played against people who we beat the crap out of. I mean, we literally had one game where like, I swear to God, our enemies didn't know that they could shoot back. But the more we played, the more it was like, okay, you know, we had like an overtime unrated match, and I was like, okay, we felt pretty well matched with those people, and it kind of went from there. It feels like as we get better, our opponents are generally scaling appropriately with us. But again, it's a pretty small sample size, so maybe the matchmaking system isn't actually better. We'll see. I think the bottom line is that there's room for improvement there. And right off the bat too, the thing I noticed in Valorant was that I was able to kind of jump right in and be effective and competitive with the level of people that I was playing against. Whereas in Siege, I remember I played 10, 15, 20, 25 plus games before I was like even reliably getting like a couple kills a game. Maybe my skills from Siege just translated over better to Valorant. I don't know, but like it felt like right off the bat, like I was sort of eased in to the game. But like I said, it's a little bit of a apples to oranges comparison. I think there are some reasons in my mind why I still think that Siege is kind of like the king of that type of game. In my opinion, the depth is still unmatched. Like I said, Valorant's agent abilities are straightforward, but as a result, they all feel pretty standard. I mean, it's like you're talking about like everyone has a smoke or a flash or some sort of intel gathering device or a heal. And they're all kind of just like variations on a theme. The ultimates are really the only unique abilities. And then on top of that, Valorant doesn't have site rotations like Siege, where you have different sites within the map that you utilize. The destruction, I mean, you've got like walls that you can shoot through and walls that you can't shoot through, but there's still no game that's doing the destruction quite like Siege is. It just in general, I want to sort of quell the idea that I'm comparing the two, because I think that Valorant has the potential to really cannibalize what Siege is doing. I don't think they're direct comparisons by any means. I just wanted to apply what I've picked up from this other game that I'm playing to Siege, which is a game that I played a lot of and I cared very deeply about. Ultimately, say what you want. I know a lot of people like to say that Siege is a dead game or dying game. But when you look at the Steam charts, it's number 4 on Steam right now, the 125k people playing. And would you look at that? Last 30 days, peak players, almost 200,000. And that is the all-time peak, our 24-hour peak being 192. Game's not dying. It's not going anywhere. Additionally, there's a free weekend going on right now, which of course is contributing to the player count. And some people are saying it's like, well, it's just because of the free weekend. But we've had free weekends in the past, and we still hit a record high concurrent player count. So I'm not sure how much that really matters. And plus, if people are engaging with the free weekend, that is an audience that is interested in the game and wants to try it out, which I think can only be a good thing for the game. So with this year reveal, Ubisoft has sort of addressed some of the things that they're working on. We've already seen like the first iteration of the streamer mode. So what we saw them roll out was pretty subpar. It didn't actually hide you from the people in your game. It only hid your name on your screen. But if what they have said recently is to be believed, they are working on that feature. So if ultimately the streamer mode for this game works like what's currently in Valorant, it should be pretty good. Now, on top of that, we've already talked about the reputation system, but that is coming out. That will hopefully reduce toxicity among the player base. And then reworking the ranking system, which in my opinion is 100% necessary ASAP. All of this is already confirmed to be in progress, so we should see that this year, hopefully. Additionally, replay mode, which I've already talked about a little bit, is a much bigger deal than most people are giving it credit for. So in lieu of perfect anti-cheat where every cheater gets caught and banned immediately, replay mode, should you choose to engage with it, gives you the ability to detect cheaters and stream snipers. You can watch your opponents that you think might be cheating or stream sniping and find out beyond a reasonable doubt and have evidence that they are cheating or stream sniping. Now, I'm not excusing Ubisoft for not addressing these issues in a better way. They should eliminate these issues at the source if possible. But replay mode is actually a really good intermediate for you to use in the meantime to combat these things. And then on top of that, it's an amazing learning tool and content creation tool, both of which things are important for onboarding new players. Maybe a new player is not going to go in and watch their match replays to figure out what they could have done better. Or even if they do, they might not know how to critically look at their own gameplay. But I still think that the existence of something like that is a good thing for the people who want to engage with it. And I think you're going to find people spending more time in the game, watching their replays and whatnot, and just generally getting better and learning more quickly when they can see the way that things play out. So another thing that Ubisoft, at least in my mind, I don't know if they've outright said this, but something that they clearly are focusing on is the pace of the game, which they believe is too slow. I mean, I have to agree with that point, at least to the extent that it's not fun to die and spend like 2.5 minutes dead, versus like, again, just using as a comparison Valorant, where the rounds are like a minute and a half long at most, dying feels a whole lot less like a smack in the face, if you will. The stakes are still high, but the rounds don't pass quite so sluggishly. Now, I think it's actually a good thing that the game has long rounds, but I do think there are things that they could do to keep people more engaged when they're knocked out. So their solution to this is offering the attacker repick, which does not address the dying issue, but it does make the droning phase for attackers more interesting. And then as well, the droning changes, which will enable you to drone or use things like echo drones, maestro cameras if you're on defense after you're dead. Now, I've already sort of said how I feel about that change, but at the very least, it will accomplish what they want it to do. It's to keep people more interested and engaged during the time when they're just, usually sitting on cameras. The problem, though, that I foresee from this, and I don't know if it's so much a problem as a shortcoming of this solution, is that people will need to understand how to use these tools properly to get value out of them. So, for example, with the repick, you need to know what operators to pick to properly counter things, and you need to know how to properly drone out the opposing team's defenders to have an effect with it. And then you need to know where to place your drones and how to save your drones and things like that to be able to use them when you're dead as well. Same thing with like maestro cams and echo cams. It's like if they get destroyed, you're not going to be able to use them when you're dead. Ultimately, these changes may still ring hollow and have a low impact at low levels of play, which is kind of, in my opinion, it's not really solving the core issue, which is making the game more accessible and easier to get into for the low level of players or the people who are just picking up the game. So what, in my opinion, could be done to solve this is to, and I'm actually going to quote what they said in the year reveal. They want to lower the floor of the game. So not lower the ceiling, not make the game easier to master, just to make it easier to get into. And I think that's great. What I'm hoping to see them do is to add more tools for learning. That's like the number one thing. And I think this is maybe what they say they're focusing on when they say they're, using a onboarding cell, I think. A team that's focusing just on the new player experience. I think we need complete rework of situations. I don't know what that looks like, but creating something like situations that actually exist in the game and not those garbage, whatever you want to call them right now, glorified terrorist hunts, basically. They need to actually be learning tools. What I would like to see is also a rework of challenges, or like even just, we'll say, a rework of progression. They just removed daily challenges from the game, which like daily challenges are kind of lame. It wasn't doing anyone any good, really. What they should do maybe is something like an operator mastery that's like, with Sledge, it's like breach 10 floors, breach 10 walls, like just to get people to use the gadgets and to help understand the gadgets. Like for Thermite, open 10 hard walls, and like in increasing order of like complexity, maybe create like a tree of progression where people will like learn how to use the things that are available to each operator. I think things like that would go a long way to helping people to understand these things. And then it's been said a million times, but we need an actual training ground or firing range, or at the very least, like a full rework of Terrorist Hunt, Just let us use all operators in the elimination mode. There's really no reason not to. It makes no damn sense. On top of like more learning tools, there needs to be more ways to engage with the game. I think the worry here is about diluting the game and splitting the player base, which I can kind of understand on a certain level, that you don't want some sort of new or casual game mode to eclipse ranked or the competitive side of the game. I don't know a lot about Overwatch, but I think you've seen things like that in Overwatch where the disconnect between like the competitive community and the casual community is like so large. Siege is honestly drifting in that direction, but I think that adding more game modes or ways to engage with the game would actually be a positive thing for bringing people into the game and into that ranked level or that competitive level more effectively, and bringing more people in too. So things that I'd like to see, something like an arcade mode, or like, in Halo, there's like the action sack. The current arcade mode is like completely underutilized. It honestly makes no sense. They have the events, which are great, the seasonal events, which are limited time, and they offer some fun new mechanic that you can try out, and then they go away. And I think that's fine that those are like that. The other thing, though, is the arcade modes, which are things like Golden Gun and Legacy, where at most it's like a small tweak, but these are just as infrequent as the seasonal events. which is kind of a head scratcher, and then they go away forever. So these are completely underutilized. What I would like to see at minimum is some kind of weekly, permanent, rotating game mode. You know, it could be like Golden Gun, and then the next week it's Attrition, and the next week it's Rainbow's Magic, and the next week it's, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I think at minimum that's what I would like to see. At maximum, I see no real reason to take any of that stuff out of the game. Why not just allow people to play, even if it's just in like custom games, like just allow people to play Golden Gun whenever they want. Maybe you queue into like a playlist that just has all of these in there. Maybe you can like turn off and turn on different ones. Like if you want to play Golden Gun one night, you can queue into that mode and only have Golden Gun turned on, and then you'll only get Golden Gun games. I don't see why those get taken out of the game, however. There seems to be no point to experimenting with that, only to take it away and not do anything with it effectively. I think there's a general problem, too, of removing content from the game, especially now that they're reducing the file size of the game significantly. I don't know why they feel the need to replace things with other things. I think that for the balance of the game, there is like a case to be made for reworking maps and operators, but clearly things like Old Hereford is still in the game, and they bring it back randomly all the time. They know people want it, but yet it's still effectively, you know, gated into just situations or just when they decide to roll out, you know, legacy game mode or something like Grand Larceny where they reuse that map in a certain sense. Same thing with things like night mode. The night maps were annoying to play on, to say the least. So keep them out of ranked, sure. But why are we taking those out of casual? Why were those maps even created if you're gonna just take them away, essentially? Even something just like the old Tachanka. Maybe for the people who want to play that stuff, like maybe like the legacy mode could just be like a permanent thing, and it'll never get new content. But it's there if you want to play all the old stuff. I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea, but I don't like that we've gotten to a place where for new content to come into the game, old content essentially has to go out. I think at this point too, kind of on top of the arcade game modes being expanded into something that is kind of permanent and ongoing, Team Deathmatch. Why do we not have it? I assumed that experimenting with Sugar Fright, you know, if you didn't play it, was essentially Team Deathmatch kill confirmed, like as it's called in Call of Duty, where you pick up the dog tags to confirm your kill. But I don't know why they would have experimented with that if they didn't think that it was something that could add value. It was panned, you know, people didn't love it. It wasn't perfect. Personally, I didn't love the like confirming kill aspect of it. But it was a good start. I mean, they proved that like a respawn system could work. So I don't know why it can't come back into the game in some capacity. Maybe you take away the kill confirmed, you add like an attack and defense side that respawn, and then like maybe you play for 5 minutes and then you rotate and the other team's attacking and the other team's defending. And you have to, you know, you can run out of ammo and gadgets and stuff, and you have to go find like a box to resupply or something. Maybe that's what needs to be done to make that work, like at least in the framework of the maps that exist. But I think it's just a shame that they created this framework and then they didn't roll anything out like that into the game. I just think like every game of this type needs to have something like that. It's better for like aim warm-up and training than something like Terrorist Hunt, and especially in its current state, Terrorist Hunt, which like you can't even play the defenders, at least not effectively. And this is more of like a self-serving point, but like custom game options are something I would like to see. I in my ideal world, the custom game settings would just become like a free-for-all, essentially. Like you can do anything you want. 5 ashes versus 5 ashes, like if you want, with infinite ammo and R4C ACOG. Ideally, that's what I want, but at the very least, I think they need to add something more to custom games to make it so you can experiment with that. It would be good for user-generated content. I mean, maybe someone comes up with something awesome that will allow you to eventually come up with new game modes that could go into the arcade mode or something like that. I'm sort of just thinking of like Halo 3 here, and how like most people's memory of Halo 3 is playing custom games. That was literally the way that most people engage with the game. And then a lot of those custom games became like Griffball and stuff like that, became real game modes within the game that you could queue into in matchmaking and play. There's essentially like an infinite well of user-generated content that can be derived from custom games. And Ubisoft is just saying, no, you're not allowed. Maybe there are other technical reasons why they can't do that, but I would like to see it personally, at least as someone who plays a lot of custom games. I think that would be awesome. I think we need a new or reworked casual mode, or at least something more relaxed than quick match. If they're not going to change quick match, then keep it as it is, where it's essentially just everything in the kitchen sink, you know, every map, every site, every operator, like, you know, there's no bans, no like limited map pool, anything. It's just like the most undiluted version of the game. Keep that as it is, but then make like Siege's version of Spike Rush. Get Flanked had an idea about this too, where he essentially had a limited timer and one attacker would spawn in the building and the defenders had like only a limited area that they could move around in. And then it was like a 2-minute round. Me and my friends have done something like this as well, where there was a shorter prep phase for the defenders. So they didn't have as much time to set up like traps and like just really get their heels dug in before the attackers were just rushing the crap out of them. I think something like that could work, but just something that you can choose to engage with the game that has like the most limited downtime possible. Something more casual than casual, essentially, is what I want to see. I just think that like quick match is like, it's just unranked light. It's like diet unranked right now. They need to have something that like sets it apart from the sweatiness of the rest of the game. And then last but not least, I think about Newcomer, and I don't think about Newcomer often because it's not something that I have ever played. It was not even in the game when I started playing. But is it necessary? I mean, it seems like a bad solution to the problem that I'm presenting. It kind of embarrassingly bad solution, if I'm being honest. Valorant doesn't have anything like this, and it seems to do okay with it. But again, we're talking about a newer game with less agents and less content, less maps. It's a little bit more conducive to learning just by the fact that it has less stuff right off the bat. But Newcomer and Siege it feels like it's probably not an environment where people are learning anything really. I think the absolute best you can say about it is that it incentivizes people to smurf and go in there to like just face off against the newest of new, the worst of the worst players, just fly out every window and kill everyone. I don't know how you learn in an environment like that, and until they solve this smurfing problem, I think nobody is getting any value out of Newcomer. Editing Nick here. I had the decent idea while listening back to this that Newcomer could become like a live PvP version of Situations, where you're provided with a pretty standard operator lineup, some pre-set up utility, a limited area of play, and are tasked with launching a default attack or defense on a certain site, with plenty of guidance, of course. For example, opening something like Chalet Garage with a Thermite and Thatcher. This might be too complex to pull off, and depending on how it's executed, there's still potential for smurfs and other not-so-well-meaning players to BM. But if there was a way to make an idea like this work for those who want to learn while limiting the damage that smurfs can do, like turn friendly fire off, disallow runouts, make utility indestructible to friendly damage, maybe, it could really help newer players enter the rest of the game with a stronger base of knowledge and base-level understanding of the meta, to give them a playground to practice some of the base concepts that make up the core of this game. And on top of that, the highest level that's allowed in there, I think, is like 50. But no one at that level really knows very much about the game, so you're not really probably coming up against typical defensive strats or typical attacking strats. You know, people aren't rushing. You're not getting like the full experience of the game in order to learn about those things that happen when you start playing the rest of the game. So I don't think it's enough to just have a level cap. I think the real solution is to offer better learning tools within the game and just do away with something like Newcomer. But it would be interesting to see if they could make Newcomer into something that could actually be used. So that's about where my talk winded down. I spent a little more time talking about my thoughts on streaming and streaming Siege in particular, but I wanted to keep this video focused. Like I said before, if you want to check out the rest of it, I will leave a link to the VOD in the description below. And if you want to hear more talks like this or long-form podcast-like content in general from me, please let me know. Again, I just want to say that I don't want this to come off as overly critical of Siege. Siege at its core is still a game that I really love, and I've always supported balancing and supporting the game for the top level of competitive and ranked primarily, even though I am myself a much more casual player. However, I think with many issues of the meta being addressed and fixes for things like stream sniping on the horizon and hopefully, knock on wood, ever-improving anti-cheat, it's time to acknowledge that the casual community of this game and the low levels of play need a lot of love if this game is going to continue to grow. Thanks again for watching.
Hit that like
This is
button.
alright.
Smash that bell, hit that bell button, hit
Destroy my
bell
pussy.
button.
Subscribe to Dumper Man.